When the human diplomat declared war, the council panicked. But how did it come to this? Let us go back to the beginning. The galaxy had existed in fragile balance for centuries. Countless species with their own cultures, languages, and histories joined under the Galactic Council, a grand assembly where disputes were solved with words, not weapons, or so it was believed in. Truth, it was a place where the powerful dominated and the weak endured decisions made by voices that claimed fairness, but often hid ambition and greed. For a long time, humanity had been one of the weak, the newcomers, the species dismissed by the older civilizations. When humanity first appeared at the council, they came with hope. They came believing that cooperation would mean peace. They offered knowledge of their sciences. They opened trade routes. They agreed to terms that left them smaller and poorer, because they wanted to prove they belonged, and in return they expected respect. But what they received instead was scorn. Many of the elder species mocked them as primitives who had risen from their death world by accident. They called Earth a planet of chaos where only mad creatures could survive storms, deserts, oceans, predators, poisons. The aliens told themselves no civilized mind could grow in such a place. For years the insults were small dismissive laughter in the council halls, sly remarks during debates, refusals to trade fairly. Humans bore it in silence because they were patient. They were determined to prove themselves without violence. Men and women of Earth sent envoys to negotiate, captains to escort trade fleets, and scientists to offer discoveries. But each effort was met with closed doors or worse, open derision. Yet humanity endured because that was what they had always done on their dangerous homeworld. They had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, famine. They could survive insults too. But patience has limits, and the galaxy discovered too late that when those limits break, humanity does not fight halfway. Admiral Lucas, at the time only a captain, watched the council sessions with quiet fury. He had seen how they dismissed Earth. He had seen how they ignored warnings about pirates preying on human colonies. He had begged for support when raiders burned a settlement, leaving thousands dead, but no help came. The council said humans must defend themselves. It was not their concern. So Lucas swore silently that if the day ever came, he would make them regret their arrogance. He would make them understand what humans could become. When cornered on Earth, families watched broadcasts from the stars with frustration. People had believed joining the council would mean safety and prosperity. But instead, it brought endless exploitation. Corporations from alien worlds stripped resources at unfair prices. Colonies suffered under taxes disguised as fees, and still the council ignored their cries. Fathers buried children lost to raids. Mothers wept for sons and daughters vanished in slave markets run by alien syndicates, and yet Earth was told to be patient, told to respect the council, told to wait for fairness that never came. The turning point came with a single incident, one that spread like fire through every human city. Transport ship carrying refugees from a frontier colony was intercepted by an alien patrol. The refugees were fleeing a pirate attack. The patrol accused them of illegal travel, and when the humans protested, the patrol opened fire. Hundreds of men, women, and children died, their bodies lost in the void. When news reached Earth, outrage erupted. The streets filled with protest chants demanding justice, demanding answers, but the council brushed it aside, calling it an accident. No punishment, no apology, no justice. That was the moment humanity's patience shattered. Admiral Lucas was called back to Earth, summoned by leaders desperate for a plan. They knew war against the entire council was suicide, but doing nothing meant more deaths. So Lucas presented his idea: not to strike blindly, not to rage without control, but to prepare quietly, carefully, to build fleets in secret, to train soldiers harder than ever before, to turn human anger into strength. For years, humanity had been underestimated. Now that underestimation would become their weapon. While the council laughed, humanity worked in silence. Shipyards expanded deep beneath oceans, and inside hollowed asteroids, fleets grew in hidden docks. New weapons were forged, weapons the galaxy had never seen, while alien ambassadors mocked humans in debates. Human engineers tested railguns that could tear battleships apart, while alien fleets patrolled lazily. Humans trained in brutal drills until they could fight without hesitation. Slowly, piece by piece, humanity built not only a defense but a hammer waiting to fall. And still the council did not see it. Their pride blinded them. Their arrogance told them humans could never rise. They mocked the scars on human skin. They sneered at the strength in human voices they called earth-cursed and unworthy. But those scars were proof of survival. That strength was proof of endurance. And that curse was what forged humans into something no other species could match. By the time the Council realized what was happening, it was too late. They noticed human colonies stopped asking for help. They noticed human ships patrolling sectors with growing confidence. They noticed the silence in debates where humans once begged for fairness now. They spoke little, watching, waiting, holding their fury close like a blade hidden beneath the cloak. And then came the day when the blade was revealed. In the great council chamber, delegates from across the stars gathered, expecting another debate, another moment to laugh at the upstarts from Earth. But when the human diplomat rose to speak, the room grew still. His voice did not tremble. His words did not beg. He told them humanity had endured insult after insult, attack after attack. But no. More, he told them the transport massacre was the final wound. He told them Earth had asked for justice and was given nothing. So now Earth would make its own justice. And then came the words that froze the blood of every alien in the chamber. Humanity declared war. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound the council had ever known. The delegates looked at each other in disbelief. Surely it was madness. Surely these fragile creatures could not mean it. But the human did not sit down. He did not take back his words. He stood with a calm, steady fire in his eyes, and the chamber realized in horror that humanity was serious. When the news reached the galaxy, fear spread faster than light. Some laughed, still calling it foolish. Others whispered that maybe the humans had been preparing all along. Fleets scrambled defenses, raised colonies fortified. But none of it would matter, because the humans were already moving. They had waited too long, suffered too much. Their fury was now a storm, and the storm was coming. Admiral Lucas received command of the new Terran fleet, his hands resting on the cold steel of the command chair. As he stared out at the stars, he remembered the children lost on the transport. He remembered the colonists, abandoned to pirates. He remembered every insult, every refusal, every lie, and he swore he would not stop until the galaxy understood that humanity was not prey. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was not to be mocked again. His crew looked at him and saw not a man but the voice of their species, a man who carried their anger and their hope into the stars. The first battles shocked everyone. Alien fleets rushed to meet the humans, confident in their numbers, confident in their centuries of experience, but they were met with precision strikes. Human warships moved like predators. Every formation practiced every maneuver. Exact, their weapons tore through shields. Their fighters cut apart enemy squadrons. And when the smoke cleared, the humans stood, victorious again and again. News spread across the stars, each report a dagger into the heart of council arrogance. Yet even in victory, humanity did not descend into madness. They did not slaughter surrendering crews. They did not burn colonies to ash. They fought with fury, but also with restraint. Every enemy spared was more terrifying than one destroyed because it showed control. It showed humans were not just strong. They were disciplined, and the galaxy began to whisper that perhaps these creatures from their cursed death world were something greater, something that could not be stopped. And so the war began, not as madness, but as cold resolve. The humans advanced, the council trembled, and for the first time in centuries the balance of power shifted. The galaxy watched in fear as humans entered battle, and no one could look away. When the humans first stepped into the chamber of the Galactic Council, the air changed, and the silence that fell over the vast hall was heavy and tense. And even though none of the aliens spoke out loud, everyone knew the same thought was running through their minds. They were watching the Death Worlders, and they were afraid. And yet they tried not to show it because no one wanted to admit fear in front of the humans who were still new in galactic politics, but already carried a weight. No other species could match. And as Captain Ryan and Ambassador Laura walked forward, the alien eyes followed them with a strange mix of awe, doubt, and deep unease. The council chamber was a place where empires rose and fell through words alone, where fleets could be commanded without a single shot fired, and for years the older species had ruled its floor with calm voices and subtle threats. But this time, the humans brought with them a different kind of power, a weight that no words could hide. And when Ryan placed his hands on the table, his steady gaze cut across the room and reached every single alien leader present, and the stillness grew thicker, and Laura's voice broke it with a calmness that belied the storm in her heart. She spoke about the treaty violations, about the hidden fleet stationed near human colonies, about the constant attempts to keep Earth under watch, and her words did not tremble, though she could feel the fury boiling inside. She remembered every story of human struggle, every sacrifice back on Earth, every scar carved into history, and she poured that weight into her voice until even the most powerful alien leaders shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But it was not just Laura's words that shook them, it was the way Ryan stood beside her, his posture like a soldier ready for war, his silence heavier than thunder, and when one alien dared to interrupt asking why humans were so quick to see threats, Ryan finally spoke, his words quiet, but sharp, and they carried across the entire chamber. He said humanity had learned long ago that survival never came from waiting politely for mercy. Survival came from standing tall when the universe demanded surrender, and the quiet that followed was not out of respect, but out of fear, because no one could deny the truth of what he said. Back on Earth, ships were being built at a speed unseen in history, factories working without pause. Men and women from every nation training for what they all felt would come sooner or later. And in orbit, new vessels gleamed under the sunlight, their hulls carrying scars of rushed work, yet their engines burning with relentless fire. Humanity was preparing not for exploration, but for survival. And the Council knew it, even if they did not want to accept it. The aliens whispered among themselves. Some claimed humans were reckless, too emotional, too fragile for the cold vacuum of interstellar politics. But others whispered a different fear. They said the humans carried something no calculation could measure, an unpredictability that had already begun to shake the balance of power, and even the most powerful fleets were not enough to silence that fear. Laura could feel the tension in the air as she left the chamber, but she also knew that words were no longer enough. The Council would stall, they would delay, they would continue to underestimate humanity until it was too late. And when she met Ryan's eyes, she saw the same realization reflected back at her. They had spoken, but the real war would not be fought with words. It would be fought in the dark reaches of space, where engines roared louder than speeches, and where survival meant fighting until there was nothing left. In the shadows of distant systems, alien fleets gathered, their commanders whispering that the humans must be stopped before they spread further, before their courage infected others who were quietly watching and wishing for freedom. And these whispers traveled across stars until they became plans, and the plans became actions. And one day, in the cold silence of the frontier, the first shots were fired. A human patrol ship picked up the signal too late, debris floating where once had been an outpost, men and women who had believed they were safe reduced to ashes in the void. And when the message reached Earth, it spread faster than fire in dry fields. Anger coursed through the veins of humanity, and grief became steel resolve factories that were already working doubled their pace. Training grounds filled beyond capacity, and ships that were once symbols of defense became blades aimed outward. Ryan stood at the edge of the orbital docks, watching as the fleet grew day by day, and his silence carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken vows. He remembered the faces of those who had fallen. He remembered the way the Council dismissed their warnings, and he knew the time for patience had ended. The galaxy would soon learn what it meant to push humanity to the edge. Laura spent sleepless nights in front of maps of stars, her eyes burning as she traced supply lines and choke points, her mind calculating how long they could last, how far they could reach. And though exhaustion pulled at her bones, she never allowed herself to stop, because she knew the survival of Earth rested on choices made in those long, quiet hours. And when she looked at the night sky, she whispered to herself that humanity had been underestimated for the last time. The Council debated endlessly. Some argued that humans should be contained. Some argued that compromise was still possible. But deep down, they all felt the same thing: fear, and it grew stronger with every passing day. Because while they argued, humanity acted, and while they stalled, humanity prepared. And when the moment finally came, when human ships moved like shadows into the void, the galaxy trembled. Not because of their numbers, but because of the fire in their hearts. One alien leader whispered in, secret to another that the humans reminded them of storms that started small on fragile worlds and grew until nothing could stand in their path. And though they did not say it out loud, many knew it was already too late. The storm had begun. And so, as the humans readied for what would come, Ryan standing unflinching, Laura working without rest, the world watched and the aliens whispered, and in their whispers lay the same truth they had all tried to avoid. They were afraid, and they had every reason to be afraid because the humans were not like the others. They were Deathworlders and they were ready for war. When the first human fleet crossed into contested space, the galaxy held its breath because no one had truly believed they would dare. But humans had always been the kind to act when others only spoke, and now their ships moved in silence, their hulls carrying the weight of every soul lost in the first attack and their engines burning with resolve that reached across the void. And even before the first battle began, the aliens watching knew the balance of power had already shifted. Captain Ryan stood on the bridge of the lead ship, his eyes fixed on the stars ahead, his crew silent but steady, every hand moving with practiced precision, because they all understood what was at stake. Behind them lay Earth vulnerable and unprotected, and ahead lay the fleets of those who thought humanity could be broken. And Ryan's voice cut through the quiet when he gave the order to advance. Not with fire, not with fury, but with calm certainty, and the ships obeyed. Far away the council gathered. In secret chambers, voices raised in panic as reports came in human fleets pushing further than expected. Their supply lines holding stronger than predicted, and even though they had dismissed humans as reckless, now they realized this was no reckless charge. This was calculated, every move sharp, every risk weighed, and one alien leader whispered that perhaps they had unleashed something they could never contain. And though no one dared agree out loud, they all felt the same. Ambassador Laura remained on Earth, working without pause, her voice carrying across transmissions to allies and colonies. Her words simple yet unshakable. She told them that humanity was not fighting for conquest but for survival. That every child on Earth, every city, every dream depended on their resolve, and though she felt the weight crushing her shoulders, she never let her voice falter because she knew the galaxy was listening, and she wanted them to hear strength, not fear. The first clash came without warning. Human ships meeting an alien fleet at the edge of a barren system. And though outnumbered, the humans moved with precision, their smaller vessels weaving through fire, their weapons striking with terrifying accuracy, and the aliens who had expected an easy victory watched in disbelief as their ships fell one by one to an enemy they had once dismissed as fragile. And when the battle ended, silence filled the comms, because the impossible had happened. Humans had stood against them and walked away alive. News spread faster than light. Colonies whispered of the human victory, some with hope, others with dread, and in hidden corners of the galaxy, species long oppressed by the Council began to wonder if perhaps the humans could succeed where none had dared before, and these whispers spread like sparks on dry grass, dangerous because they carried the promise of change, and the Council knew it and feared it even more than human weapons. Ryan walked among his crew after the battle, his face calm though inside his heart pounded. He saw the exhaustion in their eyes. The grief for friends lost, the weight of survival pressing on them all. And yet when they looked at him, they found strength, because he stood tall, never wavering, and they followed him, not because of orders but because he carried the same scars, the same fear, the same hope. Laura worked tirelessly, sending messages across stars, reaching out to species too afraid to speak against the Council, offering them not promises of power but promises of survival, and many who had once turned away now listened carefully because they could feel the storm growing, and they wanted to be on the side that would endure. And though she knew alliances born of fear were fragile, she also knew they could buy humanity the time it needed. But for every victory there was a price. Ships lost, names added to the growing list of the fallen, and Ryan carried those names with him like invisible chains, each one reminding him why surrender was no longer an option. He thought of the outpost reduced to debris. He thought of the faces of those who had trusted the Council's words and been betrayed, and each thought sharpened his resolve until nothing could sway him from the path ahead. The Council leaders grew desperate. Some argued for peace, others demanded total war. Fleets were rushed into construction orders shouted across stars. But deep down, They all knew they were reacting too late because humans did not wait. Humans acted, and each day they delayed, the humans grew stronger. And the fear that once lingered in whispers now echoed openly across their chambers. They feared not just the humans, but the possibility that the humans might win. In the shadows, spies carried messages across borders, some seeking to undermine humanity, others seeking to join them, and the galaxy became a place of secrets and shifting loyalties. And in the midst of it all, Ryan and Laura held firm, their bond unspoken but unbreakable, each knowing that the other carried a piece of the burden and that together they carried humanity forward. When the second great battle came, it was fiercer than the first fleets clashing in the dark, their weapons turning night into fire. And though the humans were pushed to the edge, though their ships groaned under the strain, they refused to break, and in the end they emerged battered but alive, while the alien fleet lay in ruins, scattered across the void. And this time there was no denying it. The humans were not a threat to be contained, they were a force to be reckoned with. Across the stars, smaller species began to rise, whispers turning into voices, voices turning into actions, small rebellions breaking chains. Long thought unbreakable, and though humanity had not asked for it, they had become a symbol of resistance, and the Council hated them for it, because every act of defiance fed the storm. Ryan stood again on the bridge after the battle, his hand resting on the console, his eyes on the stars, and he knew the road ahead was long and bloody, but he also knew there was no turning back, not for him, not for his crew, not for humanity. And in that quiet moment, as the stars burned in silence, he whispered a vow that no one else heard, that humanity would never bow, not to the Council, not to fear, not to anyone. And far away in the Council chambers, the aliens gathered, their voices filled with anger and dread. But beneath every word, beneath every argument, lay the same truth that none dared say. Aloud they were afraid, and their fear was growing with every human victory, because they had unleashed a storm, and now they had no way to stop it. When the smoke of the second battle drifted into silence, the humans did not celebrate. Instead, they worked in silence, repairing hulls, tending to the wounded, and counting the names of those who would never return. Because for them, victory was never about glory, it was about survival. And Ryan stood at the edge of the docking bay, watching his crew move with quiet determination, and he knew that the price was growing heavier with every fight. But he also knew that stopping now would mean everything already lost had been for nothing. The galaxy watched as reports of human victories spread faster than light, and though many still called them reckless, others began to see something deeper, a persistence that could not be explained by numbers or technology. A spirit that seemed carved into their very bones, and species who had lived under the shadow of the Council for centuries began to whisper louder. Now, some even daring to send secret messages to Earth, offering aid supplies or simply words of hope, and each message reached Laura, who collected them like fragile sparks, trying to turn them into a flame on Earth. The factories thundered day and night, smoke rising into the sky as new ships were born faster than anyone thought possible. And while the Council debated in endless circles, the humans acted, each day stretching their reach further and each day tightening their grip on survival. And when alien spies tried to sabotage the docks, they were caught not by soldiers but by engineers and workers who refused to let their labor be undone, and their message spread just as fast as the battles did. Humanity was united like never before, but for the Council, unity was crumbling, arguments tearing through their chambers. Some demanded the total destruction of Earth, others whispered of compromise, and still others grew silent, watching with unease as rebellion stirred in their own colonies, because the humans had become a spark they could not contain. And the more they tried to crush it, the brighter it burned. And in the quiet corners of their palaces, some leaders began to fear not just the humans but their own people. Ryan carried the weight of command like a storm cloud. Always above him, he studied maps of stars, listening to reports of enemy fleets gathering larger each time. And though exhaustion pressed at him, he refused to falter. He remembered the faces of those lost at the outpost. He remembered the silence of the Council chamber when humans were mocked and underestimated, and he swore each time he closed his eyes that the galaxy would learn it had chosen the wrong enemy to provoke. Laura spent long hours locked in rooms filled with screens, her voice traveling across space as she convinced frightened leaders of smaller species to take a chance on humanity. She promised them not dominance but freedom. And though many hesitated, too afraid of council retaliation, more and more began to side with her quietly. At first, then openly sending ship supplies. Even soldiers, and with each alliance forged, the human fleet grew not just in numbers but in strength of purpose. The next battle was the largest yet, fleets stretching across the void, weapons flashing like storms in the dark, and for hours it seemed the humans would finally be crushed. Their ships battered, their defenses breaking. But each time the line began to falter, Ryan's voice steadied them, reminding them that they were not fighting for conquest but for survival. And somehow they held, somehow they endured, and when the battle ended, the void was filled with debris. Alien ships scattered like shattered glass, while the human fleet, though scarred, still stood. The news shook the galaxy harder than any before, because this time the humans had not just survived, they had destroyed a fleet meant to erase them, and whispers turned into shouts, rebellions erupted openly across worlds, long chained to the Council's rule. And though the Council rushed to put them down, they could not be everywhere at once, because now the storm was spreading faster than their fleets could move, and every action only deepened the cracks in their empire. Ryan stood in silence after the battle, staring at the names of the fallen engraved into the ships, records, his chest heavy with grief but his eyes burning with unbroken resolve, and his crew followed his example. Mourning but never breaking, because they knew the fight was not over, and they would not allow their sacrifices to be wasted, Laura returned to the council chamber, her voice colder than ever, as she faced leaders who now looked at her not with mockery, but with something closer to fear. And she told them humanity had asked for peace, once had asked for respect once, and had been denied, and that now the galaxy would live with the consequences of underestimating Earth. And the chamber that once laughed at her words now sat in silence, because they knew she was not speaking threats. She was speaking truth. Across the stars, rumors spread of a final plan whispered in shadows, fleets gathering in secret locations, resources drained from desperate worlds. The Council preparing for one decisive strike to break humanity before it grew beyond control. And though they tried to keep it hidden, spies carried the whispers back to Earth, and Ryan listened to them with calm certainty. He knew the storm was building to its peak, and he knew humanity would have to endure the greatest trial yet. The soldiers trained harder than ever, the engineers worked without rest, the people of Earth tightened their belts and endured shortages with grim resolve, because they all understood what was coming. They all knew the next battle would decide not just the fate of humanity, but perhaps the fate of the galaxy itself. And though fear haunted their nights, it was met with the same stubborn will that had carried them through every hardship in their history. And so as the fleets moved silently into place, as worlds braced themselves for the clash to come, the galaxy once again turned its eyes toward humanity, some praying for their survival, others praying for their destruction, but all united by the same truth that whatever came next would change everything forever. And in the quiet before the storm, Ryan stood at the edge of his ship, Laura's voice echoing across stars, and every human heartbeat with the same vow: they would not break, they would not bow, they would endure. When the whispers of the Council's final plan reached Earth, the humans did not panic. Instead, they grew quieter, their resolve hardening like iron, because deep inside they had always known it would come to this. The galaxy would gather everything it had and throw it against them, and if they survived that storm, then nothing could stop them again. Ryan stood in the command deck, listening as reports flowed in fleets forming on distant worlds, resources drained from across empires, and the clear intent of the Council was revealed. They meant to end humanity in one decisive blow. On Earth, Laura received the same news, her heart heavy, but her voice unshaken. She addressed the people through broadcasts, her face calm, her tone steady. She told them the galaxy was preparing for war, but humanity had been preparing since the day it first looked at the stars. And though the enemy outnumbered them, though the weapons arrayed against them seemed overwhelming, she reminded them of every hardship. Earth had endured every war, every disaster, every trial survived, and she told them that this was simply another trial, one they would endure together. Her words carried across continents and colonies, and even to those who had doubted before now found themselves whispering the same vow: we will endure. Factories blazed brighter than ever, docks overflowed with half-finished ships that were launched anyway, crews working while systems were still being welded into place because there was no time. Every day mattered. Now engineers slept in corridors, soldiers drilled until their bodies broke only to rise and keep drilling again, and families on Earth sent their children to training camps without tears, because they knew survival was no longer the duty of a few, it was the duty of all. And when spies sent back reports of human preparations, the council grew uneasy, because they had expected panic. But what they saw was unity. Ryan spent long hours at the war table studying maps of star systems, tracing possible routes of attack, calculating where the council would strike hardest and how long his fleet could endure. He knew the odds. He knew the numbers. But he also knew something the council never understood that humans did: not fight with numbers, they fought with something no calculation could capture. They fought with will, and he carried that belief like a weapon sharper than any blade. The fleets gathered on the edge of contested space, alien vessels stretching across the void in numbers too vast to count, and their commanders whispered to one another that the humans could not survive this, that no matter their spirit, no matter their resolve, sheer size would crush them. But even as they spoke, they remembered the earlier battles, the impossible victories humanity had carved out of the void. And though they laughed loudly to cover it, there was fear beneath every word. The humans met them not with hesitation, but with steady resolve, their ships moving into formation, engines burning like fire against the blackness, and Ryan's voice echoed across the fleet, calm and unwavering. He told them they were not fighting for conquest. They were not fighting for glory. They were fighting so that Earth would live to see another sunrise, so that children would not grow under the shadow of fear, so that their sacrifices would not be in vain. And when his words reached every ship, the silence that followed was not of fear, but of unbreakable unity. The battle that erupted was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Weapons blazing so bright, entire systems lit like false suns. Fleets colliding with such force the void shook with the echoes, and in the chaos human ships darted like shadows, striking faster than the larger fleets could react. Every maneuver born not of calculation, but of instinct, sharpened by desperation, and aliens who had believed this would be swift victory found themselves outmatched by willpower alone. Ryan's ship took fire again and again, shields cracking, engines screaming, but still it pressed forward, his crew working with a desperation that turned into precision, each hand moving as if guided by something greater than training, as if guided by survival itself. And Ryan himself stood calm in the storm, giving orders steady and clear, his presence alone enough to steady every trembling hand on the bridge. Far away, Laura worked through sleepless nights, sending orders and receiving fragments of reports, each message cutting her deeper as lists of the fallen grew longer and longer. But she never allowed despair to show. She met every transmission with strength. Every voice, trembling with fear, was steadied by her response. And though she was surrounded by walls of screens and empty rooms, she carried the entire weight of humanity's hope in her voice and refused to let it falter. The council watched from their chambers, updates flooding in the battle, not going as planned, human fleets refusing to break their lines, refusing to scatter, instead pressing deeper. Each moment costing more ships, more soldiers, and some leaders began to realize the truth. Humanity might not just survive, they might win, and the fear that swept through them was sharper than any blade, because if humanity won, then nothing could contain them again. The battle stretched for hours, turning into days. The void filled with debris, the dead drifting in silence, and still neither side yielded. But where the council fleets grew slower with exhaustion, the humans only seemed to grow sharper. Their will burning hotter with each loss, as if every name added to the fallen only hardened their resolve further. And Ryan's fleet, though battered, pressed forward with a fury no calculation had accounted for. At last the council fleet began to break, cracks forming in their unity, whispers spreading among commanders that the humans could not be beaten, that the cost was too great, and one by one their ships began to fall back, their retreat disguised as maneuvers. But Ryan saw through it and pressed harder, unwilling to give them the chance to recover. And when the void finally grew quiet again, when the last alien ship fled into the darkness, humanity still stood, scarred, broken, yet alive. The galaxy shook with the news, entire empires stunned into silence, rebellion spreading like wildfire across colonies, the symbol of the council's power shattered in a single battle. And though humanity had suffered, Heavy losses, though entire fleets had been reduced to wreckage, their survival became a beacon, brighter than any star. And for the first time in centuries, the Council felt something they had forced onto others. Now it was upon them. They felt fear. Ryan stood on the bridge, his ship barely holding together, his crew exhausted and bloodied but alive, and when he looked into their eyes, he saw the same thing. He felt a fire that could not be extinguished no matter the cost, and he knew that humanity had proven its place in the galaxy. Not through words, not through treaties, but through survival. And survival was a language the galaxy could not ignore. Laura received the final reports, her chest tight with grief for the countless names lost, but when she spoke to the people, she did not let grief control her. She told them what they had achieved, what they had endured. She told them the galaxy had thrown everything at them, and they still stood, and her words carried into every heart, binding them together in the knowledge that they had faced the storm and survived. But deep in her heart, she knew it was not the end. The Council would not forget their humiliation. They would plot. They would plan. But she also knew something else had changed. Forever. The galaxy no longer looked at humans as fragile death worlders to be ignored. Now they looked at them as something far more dangerous, survivors who would never bow. And the fear in their eyes told her that humanity had already won more than any battle. They had won a place in history. The silence after the battle was heavy and strange because the galaxy had seen power like never before. And even those who had survived could not understand what they had witnessed, because the humans had fought not like soldiers following orders, but like beings defending their very soul. And the alien ships that had once seemed so huge and powerful now looked broken and small when compared to the human fleet that had come with fire and thunder and left behind nothing but silence. The council halls across the stars were filled with fear and whispers, because no one wanted to admit out loud that humans had now become the force they could not control, and even less could they stop them, because the humans had shown that they did not fight for pride or conquest, but for survival. And when survival was the reason, no power could bend them. The survivors of the alien empire who crawled back with shattered fleets told stories that made them sound like legends, because they spoke of human ships moving faster than sensors could track, and human weapons cutting through shields like they were paper, and human soldiers boarding alien cruisers with nothing but determination in their eyes, as if fear had no place in their blood. Some refused to believe these stories and called them exaggerations, but deep down they all knew the truth, and that truth was more terrifying than the lies they told themselves to sleep at night. Among the rubble of a destroyed battlefront floated Commander Darren in his cruiser, looking at the silent stars and feeling the weight of what had just happened, because victory had come at a cost, and he could see the faces of every human lost in the fight, and he wondered if the galaxy truly understood that humans never wanted this war, but once it had begun, there was no turning back. His crew worked quietly, repairing what they could and tending to the wounded, but no one spoke much because the reality was too large for words, and they all knew that the galaxy would never see them the same way again. Darren finally gave the order to move toward Earth because he wanted his people to see that the home they fought for was still waiting for them, and he knew that morale mattered as much as weapons, because humans did not only fight with steel, but with spirit. Back on Earth, leaders gathered in a secure chamber, and every word was heavy with meaning, because now the humans had to decide what came next, because they had shown the galaxy their strength, but with strength came responsibility and danger, because the alien empire was not completely gone, and others might rise to challenge them out of fear or desperation. Some argued that humans should use this moment to push forward and make sure no one ever dared to attack them again, by striking first, while others said that Earth should step back and show mercy to prove they were not conquerors. The debate grew, heated, until one old general stood and said in a voice that silenced the room that humans had always been underestimated because of mercy, mistaken for weakness, and because of kindness, mistaken for naivety. But now the galaxy would see that mercy from humans was not weakness but a choice, and that made it stronger than any weapon. His words settled into every mind present because they all knew it was true, and they agreed that humanity's next step had to show not only strength but wisdom, because only then could they shape the future. In the Galactic Council chambers, chaos ruled because messages from across the galaxy poured in with pleas for protection, alliances, or surrender, and the Council, which once thought of humans as a minor race, now could not decide whether to fear them or beg them for peace. and some council. Members even suggested giving humans a permanent seat at the highest level of power to ensure their voice guided the stars instead of destroying them. But others argued that giving humans such power was like placing a torch in a room full of fuel, because they feared humans might one day burn everything if pushed too far. Suspicion and hope mixed in every word spoken, but one thing was clear: the galaxy had changed forever. Meanwhile, among the common people of alien worlds, stories about humans spread like fire, because the ones who had fought against them told terrifying tales, but the ones who had been saved by humans told stories of kindness, bravery, and sacrifice, because they remembered how human soldiers shared rations with alien civilians during battles, how human medics treated wounded aliens without asking if they were friend or foe, and how humans stood between civilians and fire when even their own survival was at risk. These stories painted humans as both demons and guardians, and no one knew which version would rule the future, but everyone knew humanity was no longer in the shadows of the galaxy. Commander Darren finally stood before his people back on Earth and gave a speech that was carried across the stars by every channel, because even aliens tuned in to hear what the leader of such a powerful fleet would say. And his words were not filled with arrogance or threats, but with honesty. He said that humans never asked for war, but when war came, they fought it with everything, because survival was written in their blood. And he said humanity did not seek to conquer the galaxy, but neither would they ever kneel to any empire. And finally, he said that those who sought peace would find in humans loyal allies, but those who sought to chain them would find in humans an endless storm. The speech echoed across space and changed more minds than any battle ever could, because it showed the galaxy that humans were not monsters, but beings who valued loyalty, honor, and life itself. Yet even with this hope, there were those who still plotted in shadows, because fear has a way of planting seeds in desperate hearts, and whispers spread among the remnants of the old empire who dreamed of revenge, and among merchants who feared human dominance in trade, and among warlords who thought striking first would save them. These whispers gathered into plans, and soon the galaxy prepared for another storm, though this time it would not be as simple as fleets colliding in space, but a war of trust, betrayal, and hidden knives. Humans knew this, and prepared not only with ships and weapons, but with diplomacy, alliances, and technology, because they had learned that strength alone was not enough. It was the mind that won the longest wars. On a quiet night, Darren looked at Earth from orbit and thought about how far his people had come, from the first rockets that barely left the atmosphere to ships that now crossed stars, and he realized that the galaxy feared them not just for their weapons, but for their ability to adapt, to survive, and to rise again, no matter how many times they were knocked down. He whispered to himself that this was what made humans unstoppable. Not their guns or ships, but their spirit, and that spirit would carry them through whatever storms came next. And so the story of humanity spread through every world, every council, and every mind, and though some feared and some admired and some hated one, truth could no longer be denied that humans had stepped fully into the galaxy, not as prey, not as pawns, but as equals and challengers and guardians. And no empire, no council, no alliance could ever erase them again, because the age of humans had begun, and the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see what this new age would bring.